Do you think 49 is too late to change your life? At 49, Jeff Collins wasn't dreaming big anymore. He was just trying to get through each day. For 20 years, Jeff had been a long-haul truck driver all over Texas. His life was a loop. Wake up, drive, deliver, sleep in the truck cabin, then do it all over again. He lived in a small mobile home on the outskirts of Waco. No kids. Divorced for over a decade. Inside, Jeff had a worn-out recliner, a microwave that sparked every time he used it, and his dog Hank, probably the only living being who truly understood loneliness. Financially, Jeff was just scraping by. No savings, no retirement plan. Just piling bills and a daily hope that the truck wouldn't break down, or that he wouldn't either. Then it happened. The company Jeff worked for downsized. He got the call while resting at a truck stop near Abilene. "We have to let you go," they said. No pension, no warning, just done. For someone who had spent his whole life on the road, the silence that followed was terrifying. Jeff sat alone in his truck, staring into the endless night, wondering, is this really how my life ends? But in that silence, something shifted. Jeff remembered a conversation with a younger driver a few months back. A guy who mentioned learning how to code. "You don't need a degree," the kid had said. "Just a laptop and Wi-Fi." At the time, Jeff scoffed. Him? Learn computers? He barely knew how to use a smartphone. But that night, with nothing left to lose, he pulled out his old tablet, mainly used for maps, and typed into Google, "How to learn basic programming." And that's where it all began. Late at night, parked behind a gas station, coffee in hand, lit by the glow of a YouTube video at 2 a.m. Jeff didn't understand much, but he didn't quit. A little each day. Python, HTML, JavaScript, words that once meant nothing became tools he slowly learned to use. He started picking up small gigs on freelance websites, fixing bugs, building simple sites. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. $50 here, $100 there. Jeff lived incredibly frugally, spending almost nothing, and saved nearly all he earned. He wasn't a genius, but he was determined. The same grit that had kept him awake through long night drives now carried him through tangled lines of code and constant rejection. By his 50th birthday, Jeff had a handful of steady clients. At 55, he moved to a small town near Austin, rented a one-bedroom apartment, and started working behind a screen instead of a steering wheel. He drove less, walked more, and Hank now had a yard to run in. And the thing that surprised Jeff most? For the first time in his life, he felt truly free more than all those years chasing endless highways. Small changes can lead to big turning points. Jeff didn't become rich overnight. There was no magical transformation, but he was consistent, and that's what saved his life. When he first started earning a few $100 a month from coding, Jeff didn't change his lifestyle. He still lived in his tiny old home, ate simple meals, and used the same cracked screen phone. The only thing he changed was how he thought about money. Back when he worked for the trucking company, Jeff would spend nearly every paycheck. Part habit, part hopelessness. He figured, I'm never going to be rich anyway, so what's the point of saving? But with freelancing, every dollar he earned came from effort, learning, and hard work. It made him value money differently. Jeff started tracking every expense, something he had never done before. An old notebook became his financial journal. Each time a client paid him, he'd split it right away. 70% to savings, 20% for essentials, 10% for unexpected things like computer repairs, medicine for Hank, or a coffee treat. Little by little, he learned about personal finance. One video led to a blog, one blog led to a book. He explored safe investing, retirement accounts like IRAs, and how to avoid online scams. No one taught him. He just figured it out at night, under the glow of a screen and the quiet breathing of his dog beside him. At 53, Jeff opened his first retirement savings account. The amount wasn't huge, but it was a milestone. He was no longer someone just scraping by until the end of the month. Jeff was someone taking charge of his future. He didn't brag. Neighbors just saw him working from his porch, typing away, occasionally chatting with clients on Zoom in a calm, steady voice. Each year he saved more. By 60, he had nearly $150,000 saved, something he wouldn't have believed possible a decade earlier. But more than the money, Jeff finally felt alive. No more cold, lonely nights on highways. No more engine noise. Now there were birds in the morning, the soft tapping of keys, and a peacefulness he'd never known before. True freedom isn't about age. It's about choices. When Jeff turned 64, on a quiet autumn morning, he woke up early like always, made a cup of coffee, fed Hank, and sat in front of his computer. But today he didn't check his emails or write any code. Today, Jeff decided to retire. In his savings account, he had $200,000. Not a dream number by most standards, but to Jeff it was everything. Some of it was invested conservatively, some kept aside for emergencies, and the rest enough to live simply in his small town near Austin, where life was gentle, unhurried, and people greeted each other with a morning smile. No more alarms. No more tight schedules. No more wondering if he could pay the bills this month. Jeff had freedom, the kind he once thought only existed in movies or for educated folks. He realized freedom doesn't come from a massive fortune, but from knowing what's enough and building a life that fits who you are. If he hadn't lost his job back then, if he hadn't endured those lonely nights, if he hadn't dared to open YouTube and learn coding, would he ever have found this life? Jeff never went back to long-haul driving. But sometimes, on cool afternoons, he'd take a drive just to enjoy the scenery. And when someone asked, "How did you manage to learn something new at your age?" he'd just smile and say, "Because I didn't want to die without ever trying to live my own way." What's the lesson? You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to start early. You just have to dare to change. A single new skill can rewrite your financial story. And sometimes, that's all it takes. It's often the shocks that seem to drag you to rock bottom that actually lead you to true freedom. Are you in your 40s, 50s, or even 60s? It's not too late. Start today. Learn something new. Invest in yourself. Freedom won't wait for you, you have to go find it. The sudden fall. Losing a job at 49. Jeff never thought he'd get laid off. With over 20 years behind the wheel, he figured his job was the one steady thing in an otherwise unstable life. But life doesn't ask for your permission. One sweltering afternoon in mid-June, Jeff was taking a break near Abilene when his phone rang. The call was from HR. The voice on the other end was cold and robotic, like reading from a pre-written script. "We regret to inform you, due to budget cuts, effective immediately." Jeff said nothing. His mind went blank. The sweat dripping down his face wasn't just from the 100-degree heat. It was from the shock. He hung up, sat quietly in his truck cab, eyes staring blankly at the highway fading into the evening sun. I just lost my job. At 49. No college degree. No skills outside of driving a truck. How am I going to survive? That night, Jeff didn't keep driving. He parked at a rest stop near a gas station and sat still in the dark. Hank curled up next to him. It wasn't fear he felt, it was emptiness. Like he'd just been pushed off a long road he'd known his whole life. No more familiar paths. No clear destination. Just a vast unknown ahead. Every time he tried to get up, another thought pulled him back down. Who's going to hire a nearly 50-year-old guy with no degree and no office experience? Learn computers? I didn't even know how to type when I was young. He couldn't sleep that night. But sometime after midnight, with the sound of cicadas buzzing outside his window, Jeff opened his old tablet, the one he used for maps and schedules. His hands shook, doubt filled his mind, but he still typed. How to start a new career for older adults. And for the first time in years, Jeff wasn't looking for his next delivery. He was looking for a new road of his own. Sleepless nights and silent fears. No one teaches you how to deal with losing your job at 49. There's no class that tells you how to cope with the feeling that you're slowly becoming invisible to the world, while everything outside is speeding ahead, and you're stuck in the rearview mirror with a truck nobody's paying you to drive anymore. After the layoff, Jeff came home earlier than usual. Hank was excited as always, wagging his tail, but Jeff just sank into his worn recliner, staring at the old wall. The house was strangely quiet. No radio, no rumbling engine. Just the slow tick of a wall clock, as if reminding him that time keeps moving even when your life stops. In the following nights, Jeff couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The future felt like a thick fog, cold, unclear, and creeping in. He kept asking himself, is this it? Is this how it all ends? He used to always know where he was headed, what city, which rest stop, who he was delivering to. Now, he had no plan beyond waking up and seeing how he felt. His friends in the industry weren't doing much better. Some took on temporary warehouse gigs. Others remained unemployed for months. No one said it out loud, but Jeff knew. They all felt like the world was leaving them behind. Jeff's biggest fear wasn't running out of money. It was the feeling that he no longer had any value. It's the kind of fear that creeps in quietly. You don't scream. You don't cry. You just go quieter. Laugh less. Call people less. Every time Jeff checked his phone and scrolled through social media, all he saw were young people talking about tech, investments, AI, stuff he didn't understand. He'd scroll, close the app, and just sit there like a statue. But somewhere in those dark nights, a thin sliver of light began to form from one small question. If I live another 30 years, will I keep sitting here, or will I learn how to stand up again? That question didn't give Jeff an answer right away, but it made him look at the world differently. Instead of brushing off tech as young people stuff, he started wondering, is there a way I could learn a little? Not to be a genius, just enough to get by? And so, on one more sleepless night, Jeff opened his tablet again. This time, he didn't just search. He clicked on a video. A middle-aged man was speaking. You don't have to start early. You just have to start. Jeff didn't know how far he'd go, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stay still anymore. A small step in the dark. The first coding lesson. Jeff had never imagined himself learning how to code. In his mind, stuff like coding, computer languages, or software was for the young, for the kids born tapping keyboards faster than they talk. But on a hot July night, when sleep once again refused to come, he decided to try. No one pushed him. No one guided him. He just wanted to do something different. He sat at his kitchen table, opened his old tablet, faded screen, battery at 18%. He plugged it in and typed a simple phrase, coding for beginners. The first result was a 9-minute video titled, Learn to Code from Scratch for All Ages. Jeff hesitated a few seconds, then hit play. The instructor's voice was calm, straightforward, without fancy words. He talked about commands, variables, and printing to the screen. It all sounded like a foreign language, but it didn't scare Jeff. In fact, it woke up a curiosity that had been sleeping inside him for years. When the video ended, Jeff opened a website called Replit, a place where you can try coding right in your browser, no downloads needed. His fingers typed slowly with constant mistakes. His very first line of code was Python. Print, hello, Jeff. When he hit run, the screen showed that exact line, like someone had just said hello from a whole new world. Jeff laughed, a real laugh, his first in weeks. That night, he learned a few more commands. An hour passed without him noticing. When Hank nudged his leg, reminding him it was bedtime, Jeff finally turned off the tablet. But he no longer felt lost. For the first time since losing his job, Jeff had something to look forward to tomorrow. The next day, Jeff spent 3 hours watching more videos, jotting down notes in an old notebook. He learned about loops, simple calculations, and how computers also need to be taught step by step. That comforted Jeff. If a computer needs to learn from scratch, then so does he. At 49, he has the right to start from the beginning, one small step at a time. And so, he kept learning a little each day. No pressure. No big expectations. But he stayed consistent. Even when he felt dumb, even when most of it made no sense, Jeff still opened his tablet and started typing. Because deep down, he knew. Maybe his new life was beginning right from those meaningless lines of code. How your mindset about money changes when you earn every dollar yourself. For Jeff, money used to just come and go. Every paycheck, he'd fill up the tank, pay some bills, get Hank a treat, order some wings to go. And whatever was left, well, whatever. He couldn't remember the last time he even checked his bank account. To Jeff, money was just a tool to get through the day. Nothing more. But when he started earning money through programming, everything changed. Jeff's first paycheck was $45 from a small freelance project where he rewrote a piece of Python code for a college student. The client paid fast and left a great review. When Jeff got the PayPal notification, he just stared at the number. $45. Not a lot. But it came from learning, trying, and having the guts to start. It wasn't a salary. It wasn't truck driver money. It was the result of something he built with a new skill on his own. For the first time, Jeff felt like he had some control over his finances. And that changed how he thought about money. Instead of spending it right away, Jeff broke it up. Part of it went toward more learning, like buying a discounted course on Udemy. Part went into savings, even if it was just $10. Part covered essentials, but he thought twice about every item. And most importantly, he began tracking every expense, no matter how small. $3 for coffee. A new charging cable. Everything went in the notebook. The more he tracked, the more he realized how impulsive he used to be. Those cheap little joys now looked more like signs of poor habits. But now, every dollar carried a bit of his digital sweat. And that made it precious. He dove into personal finance. He learned about paying yourself first, putting aside money for yourself before spending it on anything else. He discovered retirement accounts and the difference between liabilities and assets. Concepts he'd never thought about during decades of trucking were now part of his daily reading. No one taught Jeff. He taught himself, one article, one video, one night at a time. And most importantly, he applied it. Right away. Not when I have more time, or when I have more money. Because when you earn every dollar yourself, you don't waste it. You live with intention. Even if your goals are small, they're yours. Saving 70% of his income, what seemed impossible became a habit. Back when he was trucking, Jeff never imagined saving 70% of his income. That kind of number sounded like fantasy, something for finance bros or six-figure tech workers. To Jeff, ending the month with a couple $100s left was already a win. But once he started freelancing and programming and tracking every dollar, he realized something. It's not about how much you make. It's about your habits. His first month brought in about $600. Not a ton, but enough to live on frugally. So he gave himself a challenge. Live on $180, save the rest. Sounds crazy, but he wanted to see what he was capable of. He cut everything unnecessary, cooked all his meals instead of buying takeout. He used his old phone, canceled the pricey data plan. Wore old clothes, didn't buy new ones. Reduced electricity and water use. And never bought anything unless he'd thought about it for 24 hours. And the surprising part? It didn't feel like suffering. Living simply made him feel lighter. Fewer choices. Less stress. And every time he saw his savings grow, he felt like he was putting on emotional armor. After 3 months, Jeff was saving 60%. By month 6, he hit 70%. Not because he forced himself, but because it had become second nature. He learned to live enough instead of living excessively. He split his income into 3 clear categories. 1. Essential spending 30%. Food, bills, gas, and a little for Hank. 2. Safe savings 40%. Goes into an emergency fund, untouched. 3. Personal growth and future 30%. Learning new skills or small investments in retirement accounts. Not every month brought in big money. Some were $800, others $1,500. But he never spent more than 30%. For Jeff, every dollar saved was a step closer to real freedom. People often asked, "Don't you want to treat yourself? You work hard." Jeff just smiled and said, "I already blew through my youth spending like that. Now it's time to prepare for old age, so I don't ever have to hold my hand out to anyone." Real happiness comes from what you can control. Jeff used to think happiness meant big things. Owning a truck, a bigger house, a fancy vacation. But after losing it all, his job, steady income, and sense of security, he realized something. Real happiness doesn't come from what you own. It comes from what you can control. Back then, even with decent income, he lived in constant worry. Gas prices rising, company downsizing, contracts getting pulled. He didn't steer his life, he just floated along, like driving through a storm at night, hoping for sunrise. But ever since he started teaching himself to code, earning through his own skills, and building financial discipline through saving and investing, Jeff began to feel a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. Now, each morning, he wakes up early, makes coffee for himself and Hank, and sits at his desk. No uniform, no traffic, no rush hour grind. He checked his work inbox, picked the projects that matched his skills, and planned out each day. No boss, no overnight hauls, no blaring truck horns in the freezing cold. Just him, the keyboard, and freedom. Happiness for Jeff is simple now. A breezy afternoon walk in the park near his house with Hank. The peace of mind that comes from seeing his savings account grow steadily. That moment when he finishes a tough project, the client is happy, and he knows he's genuinely getting better each day. He doesn't need much because now he's in control of his own wants. No more racing anyone. No more chasing after what society calls success. For Jeff, it's enough that each day passes in peace, with purpose, and that he knows exactly what kind of future he's building with his own two hands. An old friend once called and asked, "Jeff, how's it going? Is this kind of life actually enjoyable?" Jeff answered after a brief pause, "It's not loud like before, but I feel light inside. I own my time. I decide where my money goes, and I live the way I choose. That's happiness to me." Retirement goals no longer feel like a far-off dream. Back when he was still driving trucks, every time someone mentioned early retirement, Jeff would just chuckle. To him, that was something for people with college degrees, employer-matched 401ks, or at least parents who left them a house. For a long-haul driver like him, living paycheck to paycheck, retirement seemed like a luxury. He figured he'd work until he physically couldn't anymore. But everything started to change after 3 years of freelancing. By then, Jeff was 52. His monthly income ranged between $2,000 and $3,000. Nothing fancy, but stable and completely earned on his own. More importantly, he developed a strict saving habit, consistently setting aside 70% of what he made. His savings account crossed $50,000, something he'd never seen in his entire life. One fall evening, after wrapping up a programming project, Jeff sat down with a pen and paper. At the top, he wrote, "Retire at 64. It wasn't just wishful thinking anymore. It wasn't some wild dream. He started researching retirement planning, Roth IRAs, solo 401(k)s, low-cost index funds, compound interest. Everything he learned became a piece of his strategy. He wasn't aiming to be a millionaire. He didn't need a luxury retirement. He just wanted peace, no debt, no fear-driven work. Jeff's math was simple. If he saved around $20,000 a year and kept investing steadily over the next 12 years, earning an average return of 5 to 7%, he could end up with about $200,000 by the time he turned 64. That would be enough to live modestly in a small town near Austin, Texas. Enough to not be a burden. Enough to wake up each morning without worrying, "Do I have work today?" From that moment on, every financial decision revolved around that goal. He turned down high-paying short-term gigs. He focused on learning sustainable coding skills. He stayed healthy, knowing that good health is a big part of the retirement equation. Nobody believed him when he said he'd retire at 64. But he didn't need them to, because for the first time, Jeff believed in himself. The little house near Austin. A simple dream realized. Jeff arrived in a quiet little town about 40 minutes outside Austin on a spring morning, the year he turned 64. On the bed of his old pickup truck were a few boxes of personal stuff, a folding desk, his laptop, some books, a rice cooker, and Hank's food bowl, the loyal dog who'd been by his side for nearly a decade. The house he bought wasn't big, just about 600 square feet. 2 rooms, a tin roof, white walls trimmed in soft green. It sat off a dirt road, backed by trees, facing a small lake. Jeff paid for it all in one go, $68,000 from his savings. No debt, no mortgage, no long-term loans hanging over his head. When he got the keys, he stood on the front porch, opened the door, and just stood there in silence. No rumbling motel AC, no harsh street lights, No roaring trucks tearing down the highway at night. Just a breeze, birdsong, and the feeling of owning the space he stood in. Jeff didn't turn on music. He didn't call anyone to celebrate. He made himself a cup of coffee, opened his laptop, and sat at the desk by the window. Hank curled up beneath his feet, like always. On the screen, a notification popped up. You have 2 new code revision requests. The freelance work continued, but now, fully on his terms, with no rush against time. He painted every wall himself, built each shelf and hook with his own hands, planted herbs and vegetables out back, not just to save money, but because he wanted to slow down and live intentionally. On weekends, he'd drive into town, sip coffee at the market with a few retired neighbors. Everyone had a story, but when Jeff shared his from truck driver to coder, from jobless to self-funded retirement, many just said, "You really did that?" Jeff would smile and nod. "I just started over. One line of code at a time." His life isn't loud anymore, but every day has meaning. Not everyone needs a big house, a fancy car, or $1 million account. For Jeff, having a quiet place where he can be true to himself, that's the dream. Freedom is living by your own choices, not by your fears. Jeff sat on the wooden chair out front, warm coffee in hand, Hank resting quietly beside him. The sun rose slowly over the lake, its rays sparkling through the trees and lighting up the porch. Just another morning, but for Jeff it was a day he no longer lived in fear. For most of his life, Jeff lived driven by fear. Fear of losing his job. Fear of missing payments. Fear of the truck breaking down with no money to fix it. Fear of aging, illness, loneliness, and having no one to turn to. Fear that when he was gone, all he'd leave behind were a few unpaid bills. But now, as he looks around the small house he has meticulously built, checks his savings account sufficient for a simple life for many more years, and feels his body still healthy and mind sharp, Jeff understands that he has crossed the boundary between mere existence and true freedom. To Jeff, freedom isn't about retiring on a yacht or owning a beachfront villa. Freedom is not having to take on work he doesn't want, just because he needs the money. It's being able to decline things that exhaust him. It's spending time on meaningful pursuits, whether tending to the backyard garden or learning a new programming language. It's living lightly, without burdens, without debt. It's knowing that each day he wakes up is a choice, not an obligation. Jeff no longer races against time. He doesn't look back at the past with regret, nor does he gaze into the future with anxiety. Everything he needs, he already has. Everything he wants, he is building with his own hands. An old friend once asked in an email, "Starting over at nearly 50, was it worth it?" Jeff simply replied, "Not worth it, but necessary. Because I chose freedom, not to let fear choose for me." Lesson from Hank: loyalty and serenity. Throughout his journey of rebuilding his life, Jeff was never alone. There was always a small shadow by his side, loyal brown eyes, and a tail that constantly wagged gently like a silent encouragement. That was Hank, the Labrador he adopted from a rescue station in San Antonio when Hank was just over a year old. When Jeff lost his job and could no longer afford to care for Hank as fully as before, he once considered giving him to someone else. But Hank never left his side. Even during times when they both lived temporarily in the old truck, slept at highway rest stops, or shared simple meals of cold rice and boiled eggs, Hank only needed a place to curl up and a hand to comfort him, and that was enough. Jeff realized that Hank taught him more than any financial book ever could. First, loyalty. Hank didn't need to know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't care how much money Jeff made or whether he succeeded in programming. He just needed Jeff to be there, every day. Similarly, Jeff learned to stay loyal to his own plans. No need to get rich quick. Just persist, stay steadfast, and never give up. Second, serenity. Hank lived slowly. He enjoyed every breeze, every simple meal, every walk around the garden. Watching him, Jeff began to learn to slow down. He no longer checked his account every day, didn't panic if a project was canceled, and didn't let his heart be stressed by things beyond his control. Once, on a summer afternoon, Jeff had just completed a difficult project and was sitting on the porch, breathing a sigh of relief. Hank came over, rested his head on Jeff's leg, eyes half closed. No words. Needed nothing. Just warm presence. Jeff gently stroked Hank's head, softly said, "You teach me more than people think, buddy." Hank looked at him, gently wagging his tail. Sometimes the most precious companion in the journey of rebuilding life isn't a financial expert, isn't books, but a loyal soul who always believes in you, even when you no longer believe in yourself. Lessons from failures. They don't define you, they redirect you. Throughout the long journey from being a truck driver to becoming a freelancer, Jeff faced numerous failures. Each time he failed, he felt like he was sinking deeper into an abyss. But upon reflection, he realized that those failures weren't the end, but merely life's turns, points that redirected him to new paths. One of the biggest failures Jeff faced was being laid off from the large transportation company he had been with for nearly 20 years. It was a severe shock. He not only lost his job, but also a significant part of his identity. As a truck driver, he felt he was part of a system, respected, valued. But suddenly, when the economic crisis hit, he was laid off and found himself standing before an abyss with no way out. First, he didn't know what to do. He was directionless. Without a stable income, he faced difficult months. No money, no job, and anxiety about the future. However, that failure forced him to change his perception of himself. He couldn't live forever in the complacency of his old profession. He couldn't just be a driver forever. And then, Jeff found strength in those very falls. He decided not to let that failure define him. Instead of continuing to sink into sadness and disappointment, he saw opportunity. He started learning programming, a field he once thought was too complex and unreachable. Initially, everything was difficult, but it was the failures during the learning process that helped him persevere. Mistakes in coding weren't signs of failure, but necessary steps to better understand the nature of the work. Jeff realized that each failure was a valuable lesson, an opportunity for him to become stronger, a chance to change direction and start anew. And from those lessons, he built a solid financial foundation, learned to manage money and invest, and most importantly, found peace in life. Now, looking back at past failures, Jeff no longer feels sad or regretful. He understands that those stumbles taught him things that success never could. And more importantly, those failures didn't define him. They merely redirected him, leading him to where he belongs. A person living freely, pursuing passions, and choosing the life he wants. Embracing change. It's inevitable, but we can control it. One of the biggest lessons Jeff learned throughout his journey is that change is inevitable, but we have the power to control how we face and respond to it. Jeff's life, from a truck driver to a freelance programmer, is clear evidence of this. He never thought he would have to learn programming, never considered changing careers at nearly 50. But when he lost his driving job, when everything seemed to collapse, he had no choice but to change himself. Initially, Jeff felt very confused. He wasn't someone who could quickly adapt to new technology, and the programming world was indeed a challenge. A big challenge. But looking back on the years gone by, he realized that this change wasn't an enemy. It was an opportunity. The journey of learning to code wasn't easy. Long nights spent puzzling over lines of code, countless bugs he didn't know how to fix. It made him want to give up more times than he could count. But that change made him stronger. Jeff realized that instead of fearing uncertainty, he could choose to face it, take it one step at a time, accept imperfection, and know that every failure would teach him something valuable. When he began making money through freelance work, he understood that he hadn't just learned a new trade. He had learned how to manage his life through constant change. He learned to save, to invest wisely, and more importantly, he learned not to let external changes shake his inner peace. Life never stands still, and sometimes it throws challenges at us that we could never see coming. But instead of avoiding or resisting them, Jeff chose to embrace change as part of life. He understood that if he hadn't changed, he would never have the life he has now. Free, independent, and peaceful. Every morning, waking up in his little house near Austin, Jeff knows life will keep changing, but he's no longer afraid. He may not be able to control everything, but he can control how he responds. And in that, he's found true freedom. From day one, the story isn't just about money. Jeff's story isn't just about making money, about financial figures, or about saving every penny to build up a bank balance. While those things played an important part in his journey, Jeff's real story is about freedom, about how he found a way to live the life he truly wanted, without being ruled by fear or trapped by society's definitions of success. From the very beginning, when Jeff decided to learn programming, it wasn't just about switching careers. It was about changing the way he saw life itself. That journey wasn't just a restart in a new profession. It was about learning how to take control of his own fate. He didn't want to work just for the sake of a job he didn't care about. He didn't want to let days pass by without feeling like he was really living, without doing something that mattered. And step by step, from learning to code to becoming a successful freelancer, Jeff discovered a value far more important than money: the power to control his own life. He learned that making money wasn't the end goal, but the tool to achieve freedom. Freedom of time, freedom of choice, and freedom in how he lived. The day he received the keys to his small house near Austin was a special moment. Not just a financial victory, but a moment of personal fulfillment and peace. It was the result of all his effort, persistence, and belief in his ability to change. He didn't just rebuild his finances. He rebuilt his life in a completely new way. Jeff's story isn't one of someone becoming a millionaire. It's the story of someone who learned how to truly live, not just survive. His story proves that sometimes the smallest changes, the slow and steady decisions, can lead to the biggest results. And most importantly, it's the story of a man who never gave up on his belief in change, even when faced with the greatest challenges of his life. To Jeff, every day is a gift, not because he has lots of money, but because he gets to choose how he lives. And that is the true success he's found, a freedom that money alone can never buy. In the end, the most important thing, being true to yourself. In the end, Jeff realized that his journey wasn't just about earning a certain amount of money or finding a new job. It was a journey of self-awareness, of living in alignment with who he really is. After everything he's been through, from long days on the road as a truck driver to teaching himself how to code and rebuilding his life from scratch, he understands that the most important thing in life is living true to what you really want. Not what others expect. Not what society defines as success. Looking back on his life, Jeff sees how much time he spent living to meet other people's expectations. As a truck driver, he always tried to keep his employers happy, meet deadlines, and hold on to the job just to stay afloat. He accepted doing things that didn't make him happy just to feel stable, to hold on to a false sense of security. But when he lost his job, when he stood at the edge of an uncertain future, Jeff learned how to live on his own terms. He decided not just to change careers, but to change the way he viewed life. He stopped living out of fear and started living for what really mattered to him: freedom, personal growth, and fulfillment in the things he did. Now, each morning when he wakes up, Jeff no longer feels pressure to do a job he hates. He works because he's passionate, because it's creative, and because it brings him personal satisfaction. He knows that money matters, but it isn't everything. What matters is that he feels like his life has meaning and reflects the values he truly cares about. For Jeff, freedom doesn't mean having a lot of money or a fancy house. It means having control over his life, being able to decide what he wants to do each day without worrying about things that don't matter. He's learned to slow down, to stop chasing the endless rush, and to find joy in small, simple things, like sipping a morning coffee or walking Hank around the neighborhood. In the end, Jeff's story is proof that it's never too late to change, never too late to rediscover who you are. It's a story of persistence, reinvention, and the courage to live true to what you want. And most of all, it's the story of a man who learned how to live, not just survive. The end of the journey, we can all start over. Looking back on his long journey, from his early days as a truck driver to becoming a freelance developer, Jeff can't help but feel grateful for everything he's been through. It's been a journey not just of money, work, or career, but of recovery, of starting over. Every step in life, whether success or failure, brought him a lesson. For Jeff, failure meant getting laid off, stumbling through work, and enduring months with no steady income. But it was those very failures that helped him grow. He learned that patience, determination, and never giving up are the most important ingredients to achieving what you truly want. When Jeff discovered programming, he realized that it's never too late to change. As long as we have perseverance and faith in ourselves, we can start over at any point in life. He wasn't a tech genius, but he had a resilient heart and a determination that never gave up. And that's what helped him overcome every challenge. Now, with $200,000 in savings and a peaceful life in a small house near Austin, Jeff no longer fears the future. He has proven that change can happen at any age, and what truly matters is how we face challenges, how we choose to see life. The freedom Jeff found changed his entire perspective on success. It wasn't about how much money he had or what title he held. It was about inner peace, the ability to choose a life he genuinely wanted to live. He knows that none of us can predict the challenges life will throw our way, but we can always choose how to face them. For Jeff, this journey wasn't about a final destination. It was about the process of transformation and starting anew. He walked through many dark nights, but in the end, he found the light. Not the light of wealth, but the light of freedom, of owning his life on his own terms. Jeff's journey is living proof for all of us. We can start over. It's never too late to change, to find a new